All right, and we're live. Welcome back, everybody. It's August 12th today, and we're here for the Thursday workshop. This workshop is titled Birds and Blue Stem, but obviously we are not at a park right now. Plans change all the time, and it is 91 degrees, real feel 107. So here we are in a nice shaded area. Anyway, we are the Veterans Writing Community. We're on a mission to help veterans tell their stories. Let us help you tell yours at veteranswritingcommunity.com or at veteranswritingcommunity@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at @WritingVeterans and on Facebook. And if you find this video helpful or interesting, please like and share it because it really helps us. So I am Lacey Sprouse. I'm an Army veteran of 9 years, and I'm a current student at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. I'm majoring in geography and environmental studies with a minor in math, and I'm tech, BAMF, and stunt woman for the VWC.
My name is Angela Bassi. I am a 6-year veteran of the United States Army, a recent graduate of UCCS, and one of the co-founders of the Veterans Writing Community.
And I'm Dylan Martineau. I am also a co-founder of the Veterans Writing Community, and I'm a senior instructor at UCCS with the Rhetoric and Writing program.
I am Natalie Bonderchuk. I'm an Air Force veteran who served 4 years, and I'm currently in reservist. I'm also a student at UCCS majoring in biology, and I will be getting an internship in genetics soon. I'm the social media and graphic arts manager for PwC. And now that you know who we are, we'd like to check in with our question.
So our check-in question for the day is, what are some parks in your city or state? There are parks everywhere, but some parks are better than others, and some places are labeled as parks, but they aren't really parks, right? So what are some parks that you like to go to that are real parks in your area? In the meantime, we got some housekeeping and expectations to take care of. So the first thing is, this is a writing workshop. We are going to write. So please make sure that you have a notebook and a pen or something to write on ready to go. And we really do encourage that you use paper and pen rather than a computer to write on, just because it does change the way that you write. During our workshop, we're going to have 3 different sections to write in. The first is going to be a 5-minute writing sprint, and then we'll have 2 10-minute writing sprints a little further in. Just a quick disclaimer, we want to let you know that while we know that writing can be therapeutic, we are not therapists, and this is not therapy. So while some of the mechanisms work similarly, just know that this is not intended to be therapy. It's not intended to treat anything like that. And if that's what you're looking for, please don't come to us. I do not want to be a therapist. Not a good job for Andrew. Not a good job for Andrew. They can attest. Third thing is, don't be afraid to post questions. We want to know if you're here. We want to interact with you. We want to answer your questions. We love to have questions asked of us. So if you have a question, post it in chat. Natalie over there will shout it out to us. Let us know what's going on. And yeah.
And even if you're brave enough, you can even get on screen with us. So let us know if you're interested in doing that too.
And the last thing, as Lacey just mentioned, please like and share our videos so your friends can enjoy them too. If you're watching this after a live broadcast, use the hashtag replay to let us know that you've watched it. And again, liking and sharing really are some of the biggest and most helpful things you can do for us right now. So with that said, we are going to go back to Lacey and let her introduce the topic for the day.
Okay, so this entire series of workshops is centered around conservation. So we thought we'd start with defining conservation. It didn't actually come into like the world as a defined word until about the time frame that we're going to talk about today with our people. So conservation is preserving or protecting something, and the capacity that we're talking about here with conservation is public lands and historical elements of here in the United States. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about 3 influential, nailed it, characters Man, sorry about my mush mouth. Three influential characters in the world of conservation, one of them being Audubon, and then Grinnell and Roosevelt.
Theodore Roosevelt.
Not Teddy, right?
Well,
He didn't
that's
like
how people know him, but definitely not Franklin.
Yeah, that's yeah.
So I
Fair
want to
enough.
say something really quick about sprints too. We call them writing sprints, and so what we actually do is set a timer for 5 minutes, and it's just like a running sprint where you run and you don't stop, you write and you don't stop. So you don't go back, you don't edit, you don't read what you've written, you just write until the timer runs out. And the idea is that your thoughts flow more freely and you're a lot less critical of your own work, and you end up with some really interesting thought patterns. So if your writing starts to veer off course, that's okay. Just keep going.
So I think we're going to do our first writing sprint, right?
Let's try it.
All right. So Natalie's going to post our questions up in the or our prompts up in the chat, and I'm going to read them out for you. And our two prompts are: write about an animal, maybe a pet, that made you laugh or cry. And our second prompt is: what are things you enjoy watching animals do? I know I'll watch my cat just do all kinds of little catty things. So I'm going to get a 5-minute timer started up there, and we are going to get writing.
All right. Ready when
All
you
right,
are.
let's do it. About 1 minute left. All right, we are about done, so go ahead and finish your sentence and do whatever punctuation you choose to do and wrap it on up.
All the commas.
6 of them, at least 6%, right?
At least.
As long as you don't have comma splices, I'm happy.
They're more like junctions, really.
It's kind of subjective commas. Yeah. So one of the things we want to do is we want to talk about how conservationists sort of evolved over time and how they ended up influencing each other. So I'm going to start us off with a little talk about John James Audubon. Time for the overlay. There we go.
I
She's
got it.
She's got it. Okay, so I got my notes here on my phone. John James Audubon was an ornithologist, a naturalist, and a painter who lived from 1785 to 1851. He was a naturalist way before it was popular to do that. He was born in France, but he was about to be conscripted for Napoleon's army, so his dad shipped him off to the United States, and he avoided that. So his goal later became to create a collection of really descriptive representations of every bird in North America. So here's this kid who's like 19 or 20 years old thinking, I'm going to document every single bird that there is in this whole country. And he, by the time he was done, he almost got them all. But he also has some really interesting artwork to look at, too. We'll look at it a little bit later. He loved being in nature. Sorry, my notes just got covered up by my keyboard. Sorry about that. He loved being out in nature, and sometimes he disappeared for hours or days at a time. He started usually by observing the animals and then drawing them and verbally describing each one. But then as he learned and his technique refined, he began painting. First, he started using watercolors, and then he would overlay the watercolor with chalk to kind of give the feathers a more fuzzy look. Sometimes he would go back and redo some of his earlier work because as his technique refined, he went back and wasn't satisfied with the old stuff. So the other thing that made him unique is that he was really interested in details. So he would draw every last feather, and he would draw every last scale of their feet. He would draw every last detail of a gleam in their eye and things like that. What he ended up creating was this, what eventually became a book called The Birds of America. You may have heard of that book because it's really kind of famous. It's one of the most famous books in American history. At first, he attempted to paint one page every day, but he realized after a while that with as much detail and as much technique as it was going to take, that was going to be way hard to do. He was really interested in realistic poses, which was something that other people who represented animals and birds had not done before. So many of his paintings, they all feature the male and female of the species, but many of them feature things that these birds would do in life, like catching a fish, or with a snake in their beak, or trapping a rodent. But he also used an interesting technique in posing them. There's a local guy named Charles Aiken who would catch birds and then stuff them and then mount them, and then that's how he did it. But and that's what a lot of people did when it came to representing animals. But what he did was he um, would kill them, and then he would spend several days preparing them, studying them, and drawing them after spending weeks observing them in the wild. So he would get them and he would draw them in flight, and he would draw them feeding or feeding their young. Um, like I said, he always represented both the male and female of each species, but the detail in his artwork is astounding. And I'm going to have in a few minutes, Natalie is going to put up some artwork and we can kind of have a talk about it. He even used gold, silver, and copper in paint on the backs of some of the birds to show the iridescence in their feathers. And that was an art technique that had not been used before. As a result of all this work, this was done in the early 1800s, and as a result, his artwork and that style remains the high watermark of art of that type, and especially of nature art. Birds of America couldn't be published in the United States under his circumstances. For one thing, some of the images were a little graphic for some of the publishers. They didn't really think it was good to publish a dead rabbit in a raptor's claws, for example, or in their talons. And they also thought that it was really cost prohibitive to print these things because he would make them life size. So a lot of the prints, the original prints, are huge, they're 3 or 4 feet across. So they also wanted a lot of money up front, which Audubon didn't have. So he ended up going to England to get it into print. And the cost of printing the entire thing was, and mind you, this is in early 1800s money, $115,000, which is over $2 million today, which means that it was paid for by advanced subscriptions and commissions, exhibits, and also at one point he trapped and killed animals and sold their pelts to be able to pay for the publication. It took over 14 years of field observations and personal media management. He was like the original social media manager. He did all his own legwork for all his publication to make this giant work a success. And just as a result of this, the Birds of America sold in 2017 for $10 million, the original compilation. And it was the most expensive book ever sold. So if you're ever watching Jeopardy and you want to know what the most expensive book is, it's not what you might think. It is Audubon's Birds of America. Audubon died in 1851 of Alzheimer's. They couldn't diagnose Alzheimer's back then, but they know from his symptoms with today's diagnosis techniques that's what he died from. And at the time of his death, he had started working on a book of mammals. So let's take a look at some of his artwork, and we can kind of look at what I'm talking about here. Now, mind you, these are just thumbnails of some of the birds that he illustrated, but these are life-size things. So if you see the ones where there's cranes or flamingos, we're talking about life-size stuff. It's huge. And you can see there's owls there, and you can see the detail of what we're talking about with every single feather that's represented. He spent quite a bit of time in Florida. He had somebody else draw the backgrounds so that he could spend his time with all the detail in the birds. You can see what I mean with the middle picture on the top. You've got a raptor with a fish in its talons. So that's kind of interesting too. He really liked posing them in unique and lifelike positions because that was something that other artists were unwilling to do. Each of the drawings or each of the art representations came with its own very detailed description of everything that Audubon had observed about these animals while they were in life. So it's kind of an interesting way to merge art and writing. I love that.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me that, like, because I feel like we still do this, that those niceties, right? Like, he couldn't publish this because it was too graphic. oh, Lord forbid, nature. Like, I
Yeah,
just,
there's a snake in the like there's a dead rabbit in the picture. I can't show that. Yeah.
During COVID lockdown, my dad had a prolonged stay with me, and we put out bird feed for my cat so he can watch the birds. But in turn, we would watch the birds ourselves. And we had a book of like bird spotting book, and we go through the book and like use the book to figure out what birds are coming to the feeder, and it helped us to identify the birds. But if you look at the bird identification book, it looks almost like the plane identification cards for like World War II, to like the silhouettes. Like, all right, is that one of ours or is that one of the Germans? They have a lot of similarities between like the plane spotting silhouettes in the how to spot a bird, and that's in today. And Audubon really changed things back in his day when that was kind of the standard, and he created something more realistic. He posed them in these real life pictures. He posed them to make them look like they're actually living rather than just like existing. And that's one of the things that really blows my mind, is that I guess just how much people take things for granted.
Yeah.
Like, people just take birds for granted. Like, oh, there's a bird. That's enough for me. And even a lot of, up to that point in time, ornithologists would say, oh, there's a bird, mark it down, whatever. And that was kind of
He
enough.
really wanted to educate people
Yeah.
too. I mean, so he would spend months in Florida doing all the marsh birds so that people in Minnesota could learn about what these marsh birds look like. So it was really meant to be very comprehensive. And for a number of years, his books have been used for educational purposes. And a lot of times the artwork was used in those bird spotting books before they had photography. They would have, books like this that would, show different areas of the country, and they would use Audubon's artwork to represent what people would look for if they went out bird watching.
so cool.
It is. It's very cool.
So there's an application now called Merlin, and it's published by Cornell Labs, I think it is. But our natural resource department showed me that application, and it's really good for bird identification.
Okay.
Because that's what it's specified to. But you can put in where you saw the bird, what you saw it doing, list like up to 3 colors, and it'll give you a really comprehensive list of what it thinks you might have seen, and then you can compare it. And when you click on the picture, it gives more detailed description and recordings of their songs, which is really cool. So I use that a lot now. I actually got an opportunity to go on a bird survey earlier in the week, and with the natural resource department of the city, and it was so cool. We saw a couple of kestrels, which is
That's
good
really cool.
for the environment that we were in.
Yeah, one of the things that I really want to start doing is learning to identify them by their song,
Yeah,
because that's because you can't always see them, but it's always really fun to hear them. I just think it's really cool, like when you're going through a park and you can hear wrens or you can hear ambulance sirens.
Yeah. The perks of being outside.
It's a different kind of bird song.
Yeah,
Just
we're
ignore
also
it.
in the flight zone, so you'll hear a lot of airplanes go over. But it's I think it's fascinating to be able to identify birds and animals in nature.
Do we have? I'm wondering if we have anybody in our audience who likes bird watching or who knows a lot of bird calls. Like, do you guys use the Merlin app? Do you use books like Andrew's dad did? Or like, what do you guys do out there? Do we have anybody interested in ornithology?
But I think we're getting close to our second writing sprint, right?
That's right.
So
We are.
Oh, I also posted the link to Audubon's portraits in case anybody wanted to look further.
Oh, that
Okay, excellent.
Christie's page.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
So we're going to have Natalie post up our prompts and then the timer. And in the meantime, I'll go ahead and read them off. And for our second set of writing sprint, and this is going to be a 10-minute writing sprint, our prompts will be:
We can now.
We got it together.
How have your outdoor uses, how have, sorry, I can't speak today either. How have your outdoor use changed as you have grown older?
Oops, it's my writing that's the problem. Sorry.
Or write a poem about birds or flight. So we're going to go ahead and write for 10 minutes. Go ahead and start that countdown and let's get started.
All right.
Just less than 5 minutes left. One minute. Got 10 seconds left. Go ahead and finish up what you're working on and bring it to a close.
Man, when I finish a sprint, it's become a habit to finish the sprint with a question. so that the next time I do a sprint, I can pick up by answering the question.
I like that. That's awesome.
So
I just want to interject. Michelle did say something before we started our sprint. She said, I like watching which birds show up at the feeder, and you keep the book handy if new birds decide to show up.
yeah, if you've never heard of a suet feeder, suet is like weird rotten meat for scavengers.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
I
we
didn't
used
know
to
that.
have magpie. We used to have a suet feeder when I was a kid, and we had magpies there that would just come and just yeah. And we also had a lot of hummingbirds when I was growing up. We had so many hummingbirds on our porch out in the. We lived out in the country. We had 40 different species out there, and so many different species of hummingbirds that people came from the local college to observe them. And they would feed up from our fingers. They would sit and feed off our fingers. It was really cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, who's next?
That would be me, and I'm going to be talking about George Bird Grinnell. And I am really excited to share some stuff about him because he is such an influential person in the world of conservation. At one point, the New York Times deemed him as the father of conservation. But I hadn't heard of him up until this year when I started, getting into more of my core classes, and I wanted to know a lot more about influential characters in conservation. So, George Bird Grinnell. And I feel in some ways like a deep connection with some of these people in history because I find this common thread of people who lived in New York, which I used to live in New York, who move out west and fall in love with it and get into the world of conservation. Like they have those precursors in their early life, but they just run with it in later life, and I feel like that's kind of
That's what happened to Audubon because he ended up here because he wanted to avoid conscription in the Napoleon's army, but he got here and he was like, "Oh, I'm home. I'm never going back." So except to publish, he always stayed here. So
something about the West, manifest
fall in
destiny.
love. Yep.
But anyway, so George Bird Grinnell was actually connected to Audubon in some interesting ways. And sorry about the planes, I think it's kind of loud. They can still hear me. But so the Audubon's estate, Grinnell's father actually bought that property in New York City, and so Grinnell grew up there. And Audubon's widow, I'm sorry, I don't know why I pronounced it. Anyway, so Audubon's widow, she stayed in the area and she actually taught a lot of the kids that were in that vicinity, and they referred to her as Grandma Audubon, right? So that connection in Grinnell's early life led to a lot of things for him down the line, and he actually created the Audubon Society, which I also did not know, but he named it after Grandma Audubon, which I thought was really cool. Like there's just all these connections. Anyway. So George Bird Grinnell, his most significant contributions in the world of
Did he
conservation.
change his middle name to Bird because of Audubon?
That I don't know. That I have no idea.
From the little bit of research I've seen come up, it seems like it's just a really fortuitous coincidence. But
maybe he liked birds because it was his middle name. I don't know.
I don't know. And if anybody out there does know, please let me know, because I am just scratching the surface of George Bird Grinnell. But so yeah, good question. I have no idea. Anyway, so he formed the Audubon Society through the magazine Forest and Stream, which is actually now Field and Stream. But that magazine, publication rather, has been around since the late 1800s, early 1900s, which is wild to think about. But Grinnell used that publication as kind of a megaphone to be able to influence the public to push for legislative change, which like he used his writing. He had a doctorate from Yale. Like used his writing to motivate people to care about the things that he was passionate about, the things that he saw needed to be changed. So the main example of that with the creation of the Audubon Society was because wearing bird feathers, it's like a lot of songbird feathers too, in women's hats was a huge trend at the time that he was writing for this. He was the editor for Forest and Stream.
I actually bumped into that in my research as well, and there were some ornithologists that went out to New York, like New York City, to study all the birds in the hats. And from one of the reports, in like a space of about an hour, they observed something like over 500 birds on hats with over 40 different species of birds.
Yeah.
And one of the other things they were mentioning, one of the things that came up a little earlier, is some of the feathers that would be used in these hats were only available when it was in mating season. And the way they would harvest these feathers is they would shoot the mother while it's on the nest, and then yank the feathers out. Well, actually cut the feathers out because you don't want to damage the feathers, right? That's the important bit here, right? Yeah. And they would just kill the mothers on the nest to get these feathers.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's wild, and it was so like just gross,
icky,
you know?
Yeah.
For Grinnell, and he felt so compelled to change that he put a story, like he wrote a story for that publication, which was Forest and Stream was a publication for like hunters and fishers and like people who were sportsmen, right? People who were manly and outdoorsy. But he used that publication to influence change. He told, he wrote about how, yes, that's how they get the feathers, is because, they're taking it from the mother. And he thought the more women that know about that, the less they'll want to wear those feathers in their bonnets. And
like if they knew how those feathers came to be in those hats, they wouldn't want to wear them.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. It's appealing to that like human mother instinct, like they're taking mothers away from their children. I don't want any part of that, right?
Yeah. So, it's not even just like taking mothers from their children. It's like killing the mothers and not even letting the children live in the first place.
Yeah, that's all. Yeah, that's true. Man, but think about how controversial that must have been at the time for him to like, who are you to some guy to tell me how I'm supposed to dress, like how fashion is supposed to go in the future. But it really influenced a lot of people to change their mind about that. And they started, that kind of led into the creation of the Audubon Society. But they also, like women who wore bonnets that didn't have feathers, they called them Audubonnets, which I thought was kind of funny. But anyway.
Well, I'm going to interject because Michelle said it's barbaric. For mothers and babies, fashion is overrated.
Yeah. Yeah, and stuff like that, it's kind of still going on today. Maybe not in that sense, but like think about the human aspect of that. There's still things that, before they're brought to light, how do we get such cheap clothes?
Yeah.
It's because of sweatshops and things like that. It's just these. Anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. But so the Audubon Society that he helped to create led into things like the Migratory Bird Act as well, which paved the way for the Endangered Species Act. And before that, there was almost no legislation at all that prohibited people from just completely devastating an entire species. You don't see passenger pigeons, carrier pigeons. That's it. Carrier pigeons.
I was gonna bring that up.
It's both.
Yeah,
passenger pigeons and carrier pigeons. Both. But it was Grinnell that I think would talk about the passenger pigeons flying overhead, and they would be from horizon to horizon, and like they would almost blot out the sun, and they're literally extinct. There are no passenger pigeons anymore. The last one died in a zoo, And
Yeah.
so
Yeah, and that was it. Now
Yeah.
the species is extinct, and he just didn't want to see other birds like that.
One of
happen to
the
other
things that Natalie's going to end up linking before the end of the broadcast is a documentary on John James Audubon, where the guys who are at there's a bird museum, and they pull out this drawer, and it has like 30 carrier pigeons in it, just preserved. And he said, can you imagine the whole sky being full of these birds, and then the last one dying in a zoo? It's
wild.
terrible.
And again, still going on today. Maybe not because of hunting and like over hunting and little regulation on different populations, but there are frogs in South America where they're only born in captivity, and it's only a matter of time before they're gone.
Well, the only feathers I see on hats nowadays are chicken feathers, or turkey feathers.
Yeah.
one of the things that Natalie and I just learned the other day, we were on an interview with one of our upcoming guests, Jennifer Peterson from Rocky Mountain Field Institute. She just mentioned in passing that right up the road from there is a place where these couple hundred of fish live, and they're the last of their species. Like there's a couple hundred fish in this area, and once they're gone, they're gone. And that's what it was a cutthroat trout. That's right here in our backyard.
Nice plug for next week.
Nice. Anyway, so sorry, I might go a little bit over on my time, but I really want to.
We got an answer on how George Bird Grinnell
No way.
got.
Oh, what is it?
Michelle did a quick Google search, and he acquired that middle name at birth. So it just happens to be a coincidence. Just it all fell into place.
That's awesome. That is so cool. Like it's just, I don't know, destiny. But so one of the other things that I really want to talk about is his contribution with Theodore Roosevelt. Actually, they created the Boone and Crockett Club. And that club was for big game hunters, because at the time both men noticed the devastation and potential endangerment of buffalo. So yeah, it's I just want to say that there is, I keep saying just, sorry guys, just so my brain. Anyway, yeah, no. So there's this common misconception, I feel, that all of these things with conservation and like the horrible things that happen with the buffalo and overhunting are attributed to hunters, general hunters as a broad term. But that is just not true. It is the commercial industry and poachers who contributed the most to devastating populations like that. But realistically, hunters and people who hunt ethically by the ethics of the Boone and Crockett Club, which, look it up, by the way, like if you do a quick Google search of the Boone and Crockett Club and hunting ethics and their code, okay, there's a fair chase is what I'm trying to get at. Anyway, sorry to get around to it. I know I'm going to go over a little on that. Okay. Anyway.
No, you're okay. I think you still have one more minute.
Sweet. Okay. Crunch time. And brain shutting down. Okay. Fair chase. So the idea behind the Boone and Crockett Club was to discourage certain practices, like, for example, in the Adirondacks, they would use dogs a lot of the time to chase white-tailed deer into the water so that they could easily shoot them, right? But they had other rules like you don't do that. You should shoot a bird on the wing when it's flying, not on the water when it should be safe, and just ethical things like that, and just advocating for the sport of the hunt and trying to give that animal the best opportunity that it can have to be chased essentially by the hunter. And in some ways it kind of it brings us back to our, like, we're predators, like it's just in our nature, and it just kind of brings that back to us too. So it's just not sportsmanlike is what the club was trying to say, to use alternative methods to kill animals to make it easier for the hunters, to get the maximum number. And it just sorry. Last thing I want to mention about the Boone and Crockett Club. So there is like a trophy animal aspect to the club too. They have records of like the trophy game, right? And at its face value, that might seem really controversial. It's like, well, you shouldn't hunt for sport. I mean, yes, that's true, uh, somewhat. But if you think about it from a different perspective, if you are trying to hunt down the deer with the biggest antlers, right, with that trophy deer, then that deer is potentially past its breeding age, so it's not contributing to that population anymore. And we're encouraging people to let those animals grow bigger, right? So that's just a different perspective on like trophy hunting, but ultimately wanted to advocate for hunting for food and for your livelihood in conservative ways rather than just hunting down animals for pelts and for commercial gain and rings.
Okay.
Well, with that end of rant, we are going to go right into our next 10-minute writing sprint and have our timer thrown up and our prompts thrown up, and I will read them out. All right. So, our third and final, I promise it is the final 10-minute writing sprint. Our questions are: what is your favorite memory of a state or national park? Or take a look at. We only have one writing prompt. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I also think we could also add, even though it's impulsive, what do you think about some of those conservation, leaps and bounds in conservation that were made between Audubon and Grinnell? Might be kind of interesting. Mark, if you're a hunter, what are your thoughts about that? And thinking about that too. So, good.
I like it.
Yay.
Impromptu.
Yay.
Two.
Prompt two.
So, with that being said, we'll get 10 minutes. Get that 10-minute timer up on the screen and get started. 5 minutes, halfway there.
Cats can play. They don't want you to either.
Thirty seconds. Ten seconds. Go ahead and wrap up where you're at. do any punctuation. As I always say, it's optional. It's all relative. Do what you want. But we are going to jump into the third section, which is my section. So I'm just going to go ahead and start talking about Theodore Roosevelt. So Theodore Roosevelt was our 26th president, and he was president from 1901 to 1909. And he's sometimes known as the conservation president. And he's known as the conservation president because during his presidency, he doubled the amount of federally protected land. And so one of the things I went into my research wondering is if Roosevelt wasn't the president who first authorized a national park to exist, who was the president and what was a national park? And the answer is it was Yellowstone National Park. And it takes an act of Congress to actually create a national park, but the president still has to sign it, right? So the president who did the authorization was Ulysses S. Grant in 1872. So the first national park, actually, the world's first national park was Yellowstone National Park. That's really cool. And Yellowstone actually plays a really big role in conservation, the early days of conservation, just with Muir, with Grinnell, with Roosevelt, with a few other people. But
Boy, that's a great thing for somebody to do, for somebody who hated being president. He did not like being president.
He
did. He really did.
He did such a good job, though. And Roosevelt is, if you know anything about Teddy Roosevelt, you know that he was going to. Grant?
Grant hated being
Grant hated being a president. Yeah.
yeah.
Back to Roosevelt. If you know anything about Roosevelt, you know he was definitely an outdoor guy, kind of a man's man, right? But you probably also know that he grew up kind of a sick kid. He had I think he had asthma, he had polio. He didn't have a lot of mobility, and he ended up physically training his body so that he could go out and experience the outdoors. And something else you may not know is he loved to do taxidermy as a kid. And apparently
he loved to do taxes. I was like,
I don't know
He
of
must be
anyone
the
who
only
likes
one.
to do taxes. We'll have to
Nobody
get
loves
back to Hamilton on that one, that whole national bank
maybe,
thing.
Yeah, maybe so.
But
He loved to do taxidermy.
he loved to do taxidermy, and he actually ended up causing a couple of maids to quit because he would keep small animals in their icebox, the early refrigerators.
Ew.
And the house would always smell of formaldehyde and taxidermy and stuff like that. So growing up, he loved animals, and he ended up hearing about kind of the devastation that was going on with the buffaloes and other large game animals. And he made his way west as soon as he could, like age 24, maybe even a little earlier than that, because he wanted to hunt big game. Like he wanted to shoot and kill a buffalo before they went extinct. Sounds like a little bit of an oxymoron, right? Like we were just talking about ethical hunts, right? Is it ethical to go and hunt a species that you think might be endangered? And he ended up becoming a rancher for a while. And during this period of being a rancher, he wrote a few different books. He wrote 3 different books on hunting. And the way that Roosevelt and Grinnell actually met is that Grinnell wrote a not so nice review of one of Teddy Roosevelt's books. And so Teddy Roosevelt decided that he would go and physically, face-to-face confront Grinnell and say, hey, I don't like the words you were printing about me. And they got to talking about conservation and hunting, and they found out that they really had a lot in common, and they ended up becoming pretty quick friends. And this is just from my research, so I could be totally off base here. But I think that Grinnell and Roosevelt meeting caused a change in Roosevelt. And so he ended up starting to see not just the hunting aspect, but the real importance of conservation. Like he talked about it before in his books about how it's sad to see these animals go. But I think the connection with Grinnell really drove home how important conservation and preservation is. And so from the little bit of research I've done, it seems that Roosevelt had a little bit of a shift in how he wanted people to interact with nature and with game, with hunting, with the outdoors. And so Roosevelt went to Yellowstone, and he had John Muir, who was just this phenomenal outdoor guy who spent a lot of time in Yellowstone.
We'd have done John Muir if we had more time.
But he got Muir to just give him a tour around Yellowstone, and he loved it. Later on, he got Muir to give him a tour of Yosemite. And fun story about this, this happened while Roosevelt was a president, and he actually had to sneak away from everyone, and he actually snuck out of a official dinner and ended up ditching all the dignitaries and politicians and people who thought they were going to see him, and he ended up spending 3 days out in the woods with John Muir instead. That was what he wanted to do. And so forgot where I was going with that. Anyway, I have some other stuff I want to mention here too. One of the other cool things that Theodore did was he authorized the U.S. Forest Service. So the U.S. Forest Service started because Roosevelt authorized it. I mentioned that Roosevelt doubled the amount of nationally protected land, and what that looks like is he created or enlarged 150 national parks, 51 federal bird refuges, 4 national game preserves, 6 national parks, and 18 national monuments.
You might have to repeat those early numbers again because that plane flew over.
I'm going to say that one more time real quick.
Yeah.
He created or enlarged 151 national forests, 51 federal bird refuges, butchering that word, great, 4 national game preserves, 6 national parks, and 18 national monuments. And those national monuments, that's kind of an entire topic in and of itself. And so in 1906, Congress passed what's commonly called as the Antiquities Act, or the National Antiquities Act. And one of the important parts of that for our discussion is that it allowed the president to pretty much arbitrarily designate a place of land with scientific or historical value as a national monument. And so it didn't take an act of Congress to do this. It only took a president's signature. And so some places like the Grand Canyon started off as a national monument because people were advocating and lobbying to get the Grand Canyon to be a national park, and it just wasn't happening. And so Roosevelt ended up saying, all right, well, it's a national monument. And then that enabled the federal government to kind of put some limitations on all the construction and industrialization that was going on, and led to becoming I believe it's a national park now, right?
Yeah.
So that Antiquities Act gave Roosevelt a lot of power that he definitely used, and some would probably even to this day say abused. I disagree. I think he used it wisely in this context. But Roosevelt was a bully, and he used the tools he had to do the things that he thought were right. And you can agree with that, you can disagree with that, but we wouldn't have the Grand Canyon as a national monument if it wasn't for kind of the ramrodding that he did. A lot of work.
It sounds like if he made there was the idea of national monuments being a way to stave off encroachment on those areas until they could get the legislation through for national parks, because it seems like the national parks, it took an act of Congress to do this huge thing to put it through. So by making it one signature only, it was a way to sort of say, okay, eventually this is going to be a park, but for now I'm going to make it safe and keep crazy people off, keep people from hurting it.
And I actually have a couple of quotes from Roosevelt, specifically in reference to the Grand Canyon and some other stuff that I want to read off. So the first is, and this is specifically in reference to the Grand Canyon. He's at the Grand Canyon talking to the people of Arizona. Leave it as it is. You cannot improve on it. The ages have been at work on it, and men can only mar it. What you can do is to keep it for your children, your children's children, and all who come after you, as one of the great sights of which every American, if he can travel at all, should see. And then this isn't part of the same quote, but I still think it's important. We have become great because of the lavish use of our resources. But the time has come to inquire seriously what will happen when our forests are gone, when the coal, the iron, the oil, and the gas are exhausted, when the soils have still further impoverished and washed into the streams, polluting the rivers, denuding the fields, and obstructing navigation. So Roosevelt was all about building big things. He loved big things. But part of the big things he loved was nature's big things. The Grand Canyon. It's not the big canyon, it's the Grand Canyon, right? He loved that area. And one of the things that he did not want to happen was for it to become industrialized, to become polluted, commercialized.
Yeah.
And we should think about that in all the things, not just the national parks, not just our state parks, but the areas that we use ourselves. It's good to use and build and improve things, but if that's all you do, you're leaving nothing left for those who follow on.
Yeah. One of the things we're going to do when we finish up tonight is we're going to talk about ways that you can make a difference in your own community. So just keep watch for that. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. So I found this to be interesting. This is the first time we've used this format where we kind of bring up some stuff. We have a little discussion where there's three of us sitting here talking to each other. And I'm finding it to be a really enjoyable format. I don't know about you guys, but I think it's working pretty well. I like it. So if you find this format to be enjoyable and helpful, make sure you tell us in the comments. Give us a thumbs up, like and share this video so that we know we're on the right track.
And if you don't like it, tell us that too, because we need feedback. If you don't tell us what you like and don't like, we don't know.
That's right. And we always grow and learn. So give us your thoughts and we will consider them. As the veterans writing community, we like to help veterans work on their writing, whether it's writing that you've never written before and you want to try writing as a form of self-expression, or you want to try writing as a way to feel better, to sort out your jumbled thoughts. Or maybe you have written some stuff and you don't know what to do with it, and it's calling to you and it's asking you to do something with it. Either way, get a hold of us because we can help you with that. We have some tenets that I want to go over. There are 4 basic tenets that we think about when we write, and that I'm just going to go over them briefly. The first one is, who are you writing this to? And so who is your audience? You might be writing just to yourself. You might be writing to your spouse. You might be writing to your kids. You might be writing to other veterans or to civilians. Depending on who your audience is, that's going to determine how you frame what you're going to say. You would certainly write differently to a combat veteran than you would to a child. So your voice will be completely different depending on who your audience is. The second tenet is, will your audience understand everything you say? And this is really closely related to that first tenet, because if you are writing in a way that appeals to them, are they going to understand what you're saying? Sometimes we choose to deliberately be vague because there are some topics that are sensitive, or maybe we're trying to sort of say things in a way that won't be offensive. But if the audience understands what you're trying to say, if they're going to understand what you're trying to say, it's really going to depend on how you say it. So it's really important to be clear in how you come across. The third one is the story all there, or are there parts you left out? Sometimes when you write, especially if you're journaling, you like to recall things as they occur to you. So you might make sort of a linear list or sort of a timeline based response to something. But you may have left things out because you don't remember, or it's painful, or you're something you want to avoid, or there's something you want to avoid talking to somebody about. So maybe writing about it and then leaving things out. Maybe 6 months you go back and you revisit that piece of writing and you're able to fill in some of those gaps. Or maybe having a conversation with somebody you served with might help you fill in some of those gaps because they have different memories of the same events that can help fill in your blank spots. Or maybe you're intentionally leaving things out because if it's painful now, maybe in 6 months, a year, 10 years, it won't be painful as painful anymore, and you may be able to fill in some gaps then. So don't be afraid to set your writing aside. Just because you write it down doesn't mean anybody has to see it. And the writing will call to you. It will tell you what it wants you to do when it's ready for you. And then the last one is, why are you writing specifically about this thing? So we give you writing prompts to kind of inspire you that are relevant to what we're talking about at the time. But I, for instance, didn't write about any of those prompts. I wrote about stuff that I find that I need to get off my chest. And so I don't necessarily need to share that stuff, but there's something in your mind that tells you, why are you writing about this thing right now today? It's because it has some relevance in your life. And sometimes that can take off and become something amazing. Sometimes it's just I've got to get it out so it's not pressing on my brain and not waking me up at 3 a.m. But there's always some reason about why you write. And if you think about why you're writing about something, that's metacognition. It's thinking about how you think. And that can really open up new learning pathways in your brain. So it's always good to have. So.
Nice.
All right. I think I'm going to hand it off to you because you've got some things you want to say.
Yeah, my knees hurt, so I'm going to do the closing announcements. All right. So you don't have to share with us what you wrote today, but if you do share, do share with us if you want to, is what I was trying to say. My goodness.
Yeah, we're always open to you can email us or stuff.
Yeah,
So.
we like just hearing from our audience, and I really like when people send us some of their writing because we can get some feedback back to you, and that just strengthens our community. So
yeah, and if you're interested in publishing, there's stuff scrolling across the bottom of the screen that can help you do that. So.
yeah. So join us next time for Jennifer Peterson from the Rocky Mountain Field Institute. She's going to talk to us about grant writing. Like and share this video. Tell your friends if you found it interesting, fun, or helpful. And please put thoughts and reactions in the comment section using hashtag replay if you're watching or recording. And we have some follow-up activities for you too. So go for a walk this week with a trash bag and some gloves. Don't forget the gloves. And pick up trash as you go. We do this every once in a while.
We have a picker too. We like to walk with a picker.
Yeah, pickers make it very nice, just in case you get a little bit more than you bargained for when you go in and pick up trash around the neighborhood. But
and it just helps to not have to bend over for every single cigarette butt you want to clean up too.
Oh, yeah.
Those
That's
little
true.
mechanical fingers are wonders.
Yep, but it's really nice. We do it pretty often. Like get together as a group, go out with a trash bag, and just walk, talk, pick up trash, and it just makes the neighborhood a little bit better for everybody else.
Yep,
So
and
maybe
then you don't have to look at it the next time you walk by it.
Yeah, too. Just
You get to look at different trash.
yeah, exactly. All right. So visit your local nature center, state or national park, or wildlife preserve or sanctuary to learn about local issues and resources. Visit your local zoo to learn about conservation efforts there. There are, I would venture to say, in just about every town, there are numerous conservation organizations that maybe you didn't know about. I know I found out about a lot of different organizations I had no idea existed in Colorado Springs just this year.
Did you know that the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo here in Colorado Springs raises and gives away more giraffes than any zoo in the world?
Holy cow.
I didn't know.
They do. They raise them here
giraffes.
because they're high
Whatever.
altitude. They raise them here because it's the high altitude makes their blood vessels and their hearts and the blood a lot stronger, and so
Huh.
they can survive at lower altitudes with like super. That's why the Olympic athletes train here
Yeah.
too. They get
That is so cool. I
Super
didn't know about the
animalized.
giraffes.
yeah, it's really cool.
Oh man. So yeah, I think we mentioned before we were posting a link to the Audubon documentary on Amazon Prime if you have it. So yeah, go ahead and watch that. It's super interesting. We really enjoyed it. So 20-minute sprint as a follow-up to finish your thoughts or develop what you started here. So that can be really helpful in just kind of developing those thoughts. And who knows, you might kind of something else might kind of kick loose in your brain after sitting on that prompt for a little while and then just picking it back up. So challenge yourself to do that. Just make that time because you deserve it. So email us, visit our website for follow-up, or to arrange one-on-one work towards publication in our.
And we do have a publication called the After Action Review that we publish in January. So if you're interested in maybe using us as a venue for publication, then contact us by emailing us or through our website, and we will be in touch.
Thanks
That
everybody
wraps
for
everything up.
joining us. We really appreciate it, and see you next time.
Yep, go watch some birds.
Take care, y'all.